Welcome to Meeting 97 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Public Safety and National Security. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the standing orders. Members are attending in person in the room and remotely using the Zoom application. I would like to make a few comments for the benefit of witnesses and members. Please wait until I recognize you by name before speaking. To prevent disruptive audio feedback incidents during our meeting, we kindly ask that all participants keep their earpieces away from the microphone. Audio feedback incidents can seriously injure interpreters and disrupt our proceedings. A reminder that all comments should be addressed through the chair. Pursuant to the motion adopted on October 23, 23, the committee resumes its study on the growing problem of car thefts in Canada. We have today two panels of witnesses. I would like now to welcome our witnesses for the first panel. Canadian Automobile Dealers Association, Hugh Williams, National Spokesperson. Canadian Vehicle Exporters Association, Damon Lyons, Executive Director. Global Automakers of Canada, David Adams, President. Up to 5 minutes will be given for opening remarks, after which we will proceed with rounds of questions. So I welcome all of you here today. I now invite Mr. Williams to make an opening statement, but just before you start, Mr. Williams, Mr. Shipley.
Thank you, Chair. And just very briefly, thank you, witnesses, for being here. I just want to quickly mention to the committee that I wanted to welcome Damien Kirk, MP, who's now a permanent permanent member of this committee. And I was a little remiss in not doing it Monday, and I should have done it. I just wanted to welcome him to our team here. Thank you.
Congratulations on your residency. Okay. Okay, Mr. Williams, if you could for 5 minutes, please. Thanks. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The PEI dealers say hello, and I mentioned that I was testifying before your committee today, and they send their greetings. Good morning, bonjour. On behalf of the 3,500 independently owned franchise car dealers across the country, I want to thank this committee, and it's not a kind of perfunctory opening thank you. I want to thank you for holding these hearings and advancing the issue of stopping auto theft. Every party around the table has pushed on this issue, and we appreciate it. We appreciated the National Summit. Mrs. O'Connell, we saw you there, and appreciated your attendance, Madame Michaud, as well. I think it sends a really strong signal that all the parties are together and moving forward. And I met with a member from Montreal on the way up to testify today, who's holding a round table in their riding in Montreal on this. So the issue is getting attention, but this committee is really, really important. And why it's important is auto theft is not a local problem. It's a national and international problem that impacts not just main streets, but it impacts every home and every driveway in the country. Our 160,000 employees and our over 4 million customers that we serve annually are frontline victims of this organized crime. Interpol has made it very clear that this is an international problem, and that Canada is a major source country for the export of stolen vehicles. We are literally exporting stolen vehicles from neighborhoods, driveways, homes across the world. Our dealership employees are being carjacked, they're being held at gunpoint, they're being pistol whipped, they're run over, they're strong-armed out of vehicles on a daily basis. Every single dealership in the country has a detailed security plan and theft protocols to protect their assets and their people, and have gone to the extent of hiring former law enforcement security officials to try to protect their dealership. If these international crime rings are thwarted at our local stores, they just go steal factory direct. Days before the Auto Summit was held here in Ottawa, and again appreciative of that initiative, thieves broke into the Oakville Ford plant, went in and stole $650,000 worth of vehicles right from the Ford plant. This is organized crime at its best. Most importantly, however, our customers are the victims of this crime. There's armed home invasions that are happening to access keys. They're kicking in doors in the middle of the night. They're carjacking, armed carjackings in the driveway with kids in the car to take the keys. And they're holding our customers at gunpoint, and they're carjacking not just everyday Canadians, but NHL stars, sports stars. And this is Canada, not Central America that we're talking about. This should not be happening in our country. Everybody here would be aware of the stats coming out of the auto summit, but they've been well known to the auto sector for a long time. Up 300% since 2015 in the Greater Toronto area. These are shocking numbers. But the problem is that every police agency knows what's happening. It's costing us $1 billion a year, and the simple formula is this. The cars are being stolen, and they're being shipped, towed, sent by rail to the Port of Montreal, where the cars are then exported out of the country without CBSA inspection, and they're being sent to Africa, Eastern Europe, and elsewhere where they're sold by international crime. The problem is that it's being used to fund guns, drugs, fentanyl, and street crime in Canada. And that's not our view as the Car Dealers Association. That's what frontline police officers tell us. They all know what's happening. That's what senior police officers tell us, and that's what chiefs of police tell us. It's a pipeline out of the country that's the real problem. So it requires concrete federal action. We need to ensure that while funding announcements are appreciated, that action takes place quickly on this, as cars are still being stolen every day. The violent crime that's associated with them is taking place every day. We need a senior official appointed in almost like an auto czar-like format to make sure that CBSA and some of the other departments are brought together to do things differently. Doing it the same old way is not going to get it done in this solution. We need a new way of addressing organized crime. I'll tell you quickly that CADA has a long history of working on this issue. We advocated for, when we saw stolen vehicle rates in the early 2000s outstrip the United States, and we advocated loudly for a new bill on this, Bill S9, which was a specific law passed in 2010 that made it a specific crime to steal an automobile. It also cut down on the trafficking of VIN numbers. It addressed chop shops, and it made it an offense to traffic in stolen vehicle parts. But the most important thing that was passed in 2010 in S9 was it gave the Canada Border Service Agency the right to search containers before they left the country. We saw a dramatic drop as that took place, and what we're looking forward to is a continued ramp up of CBSA's activity in conjunction with the RCMP and provincial police forces. Thank you. Look forward to the questions.
Mr. Williams, thank you. Now invite Mr. Lyons, please, to make an opening statement.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, esteemed members of the committee, and my fellow invited guests. The Canadian Vehicle Exporters Association would like to thank you for the invitation to appear today on the critical topic of vehicle theft in Canada. I would like to start with a quote. Police have put the brakes on auto theft in the Greater Toronto Area, and the effect is so dramatic that the Toronto Police Chief and insurance investigators are taking notice. This quote is one which every person in Canada hopes to see in the media in the very near future. However, this quote was in fact first given nearly 12 years ago in a 2012 article entitled, "How Auto Theft Became a Dying Criminal Art in Toronto." The implication from this article is, of course, that prior to 2012, Canada was dealing with a substantial auto theft problem. However, with certain efforts, we were seemingly able to turn the tide in the battle during that time period. This begs the question, what is Canada's history of vehicle theft? What policies and procedures led to such a dramatic reduction in the past? What has led to our recent surge in vehicle theft? And how can we apply our past successes to the problems of today? Where are we today? The most relevant metric to gauge vehicle theft trends is to compare thefts against the actual number of vehicles registered on Canadian roads. In 2022, this theft rate equated to approximately 404 thefts per 100,000 registered vehicles. Where were we in the past? If we go back 22 years to 2001, we saw a theft rate of 931 per 100,000. Auto theft rates today are more than 50% lower than they were 22 years ago. Please don't get me wrong. This overview is in no way meant to discount the very real problem that exists now. On a daily basis, we see media reports of auto theft recently transitioning from property crime to a crime of violence in the form of break-and-enters and armed carjackings. Technology in the form of residential cameras allows us to instantly see with our own eyes mass perpetrators standing on our doorsteps at 3 a.m. or brandishing a firearm in the direction of an unsuspecting, terrified victim. The monetary cost is, of course, staggeringly large, with all estimates agreeing on a value well north of $1 billion of damage. This overview, rather, is to draw attention to our past successes in an attempt to understand the root causes of the issue so that we can develop well-thought-out solutions in today's current fight. In our longer submission to the committee, the CVA has compiled a number of historical events as a reference on how success can be achieved. Chief among these is the recent surge in organized crime. A recent report by Criminal Intelligence Service Canada stated that in just 1 year, between 2022 and 2023, they assessed there was a 62% increase in the number of organized criminal groups operating in the stolen vehicle market. It cannot be a coincidence that this increase in organized crime coincides with the timing of the recent surge in vehicle theft. This is leaving a stain on Canada's reputation as a trading partner. Interpol now describes Canada as a source nation for stolen vehicles. This should not sit well with any of us. Canada is a nation based on trade. Our reputation on the international stage is paramount to our collective success. In the automotive industry, for well over 40 years, Canada has been known around the world as the most trusted nation to do business with and source vehicles from the international market. When organized crime threatens Canadian citizens and businesses, it is incumbent upon the government to root out organized crime so that Canada can regain its rightful place as a leader in trusted international trade. Lastly, the CVA would like to commend the government for committing $28 million to the CBSA in their efforts to modernize their intelligence gathering systems to root out illicit goods while ensuring that the flow of regular trade is not unintentionally adversely affected. Thank you for your time. The CVA looks forward to today's discussion and the ongoing work that I'm sure we're all committed to.
Thank you, Mr. Lyons. And Mr. Adams, your opening statement, please.
Aaron, thank you to the members of the committee for inviting me to appear before you today. My name is David Adams. I'm the President and CEO of Global Automakers of Canada, which is a national trade association whose members include 15 of the world's most recognized automakers representing 25 different brands, including Canada's two largest vehicle producers, Toyota and Honda. I would in particular like to thank MP Michaud for bringing forward the motion to undertake this important study. It's important to keep in mind that what we're really talking about here is in fact organized crime in Canada, with auto theft being one of its most visible symptoms. Given the complex nature of this issue, Global Automakers of Canada has been advocating for this committee to be formed to undertake a study of this issue for some time, as well as advocating for a national summit on auto theft to bring together all relevant stakeholders and experts, which we participated in on behalf of our members earlier this month. When we think back over the last 2 years why this issue has grown so rapidly, it's clear that theft has become increasingly highly lucrative for organized crime groups in this country. Indeed, Canada has been, as you have heard, identified by Interpol as a source nation of stolen vehicles. You're all well aware of the statistics, which I won't go into and repeat, but the reality is one vehicle is stolen every 5 minutes across Canada. In the hardest hit parts of the country, Ontario and Quebec, we're seeing criminals increasingly resorting to violent crimes like carjackings and home invasions to steal vehicles. We applaud the Government of Canada's recent announcements of increased funding for law enforcement resources, including for CBSA at Canada's ports, for starting to tackle the availability of car theft tools in Canada, and the need for better coordination between various law enforcement agencies, both domestically and internationally. We've seen firsthand the impact of the $51 million committed by the Ontario government last year to establish a provincial auto theft task force with respect to both busts and recoveries, highlighting that resources, while not the only solution, do make a huge difference. To support that work, we think the Government of Canada should consider setting up a national task force on auto theft to coordinate these efforts and help cut through jurisdictional barriers to cooperation. We also need to ensure that government policies don't undermine our efforts. While automakers are working to make their vehicles ever more secure, we're also being asked by right to repair advocates to make more of our vehicle systems open to third parties. Legislation like Bill C-244, which is currently before the Senate, will make it easier for bad actors to find ways to bypass technologies automakers are constantly introducing to make it more difficult to steal vehicles. Collectively, we need to be smart, we need to be coordinated, and we need to be comprehensive. Canada's automakers have been closely engaged in this issue for years and are ready and willing to cooperate with those who share our desire to mitigate auto theft. What are we doing about the issue? Automakers are constantly reviewing and updating the security systems in our vehicles, but are facing increasing odds against sophisticated international organized crime rings who have identified Canada as a market opportunity for their crimes. Vehicles with similar security systems in other countries aren't facing the same kind of challenges to the same degree with auto theft. We're convening monthly meetings with other key industry trade associations, police authorities, and auto theft task forces to share intelligence and map out advocacy initiatives on auto theft and determine how we can better knit together law enforcement with automakers to assist in interdicting vehicles immediately after they have been reported stolen. We've been developing a soon-to-be-launched website that will be focusing on providing awareness on auto theft to consumers and also on auto theft prevention and informational assistance to those that have had their vehicles stolen. We've been meeting with Amazon and other online platforms to discuss the reality that tools and devices with apparently no other legitimate purpose other than to facilitate auto theft are readily available on their platforms. Other jurisdictions like the UK are already moving to ban such devices. We've also been encouraging all of our members to meet with police teams when vehicles are recovered to better understand how thieves have compromised the vehicle to steal it so that this information can be supplied to global engineering teams. We don't have all the answers by any means, and auto theft is a very complex problem for which there are no quick fixes or silver bullets. However, we do believe that there are some short, medium, and longer-term initiatives that could be undertaken to address the auto theft problem plaguing our country right now. We look forward to working with the committee to identify and implement these solutions. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you all for your opening remarks. I will now open the floor for questions. For 6 minutes, Mr. Motz, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. I appreciate you witnesses for being here today. And thank you for being part of the finding a solution. As we've heard over witnesses so far and in reading what's going on in your testimony today, that solving this problem is basically an all of industry, all of society type concern. It involves prevention, it involves consumer awareness, the justice system changes, police CBSA involvement, technology, insurance, like many facets to fixing this government policy. So, you know, I was interested in your last comments, Mr. Adams, but you said you were concerned about government policies that may actually hinder the work being done to prevent car thefts. And I know you talked about some technology side of it. Does that also include the potential for, you know, the current government software on crime approach? Does that have any impact on, and all three of you can weigh in on that, does that have any impact on the reality of where we're at? Toronto told us on Monday that 50% of their thieves that they catch are repeat offenders. So I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on this.
I would say in response to the question is that if you look at the reality that organized crime right now, where auto theft fits in the hierarchy of where they're focusing their activity, my understanding that it's third on their list now. And if the two things that are ahead of it are drugs and other such initiatives, fentanyl, and when you think about the consequences of being charged with drug possession or trafficking in drugs, I guess what I would say is that maybe we need to look at similar type of provisions with respect to the consequences of being prosecuted for auto theft crimes.
Mr. Williams?
I would say this. We've literally done hundreds of meetings with police agencies. Our dealers are meeting in the communities with police all the time. And the number one thing that we hear from our dealers meeting with police and our own meetings is that the revolving door justice system. People are arrested and they're let out the same day. Police are extremely frustrated with this. I know you're hearing from police officials, but I can tell you the line officers, that's what they're frustrated with. And there's also a formula that the police are well aware of, and we certainly see it again across communities, is it's low risk, high reward. These are very valuable assets that are being sold across the world, and thieves are being paid a sum for, a handsome reward for stealing the vehicles with a low risk of getting caught and a low risk of severe punishment. And I think if you look at that equation, it's definitely a root of the problem. Organized crime is exploiting it.
Thank you for those comments. I know that you both mentioned, and we heard from our witnesses on Monday, that carjacking has certainly increased, and that increases, that increases the risk to the owners of these vehicles. Not just I lose my vehicle, but I have the risk of losing my life or that of my family or our bystanders, right? And so the same thing applies. Unfortunately, this government has chosen to have some firearm offenses. Those penalties reduced for the use of a firearm. And again, I would presume your thoughts are similar in those cases where the sentences, if they get caught and if they're convicted, don't match the actual offense that's being committed. They're carjacking.
Yeah, I would leave it to the police officials to comment on that, and you'll hear from them. But what I can tell you is that frustration is out there from line officials in terms of that revolving door justice system, and the fact that once they run a case on this, it's very difficult to see these offenders out recommitting, and that cycle again is well known to organized crime, and it's international organized crime taking advantage of the way Canada operates.
So there's a comment made last time we had the CBSA union here. You made a comment, Mr. Williams, about the CBSA. Is there a way to fix? I know we can give more money to the CBSA. We can ask them to put more officials at the ports, more officers on the ports. Is there a way that we can get the demand of what's going on at the ports, for example, and at the rail? And we heard last on Monday that there's a lot of vehicles leaving the Toronto area on rail as well, that CBSA doesn't check. We've been told. Is it a change of upper management? Is it a change of focus? Like what's going on that doesn't seem to translate into actually getting any action at the port?
Maybe I can address this.
Yeah, please.
Absolutely.
Yeah, you deal with them all the time.
Yeah, so I spent 22 years in the export market as an authorized registered dealer. With CBSA, since 2020, we've had what's called the CERS portal, where everyone that exports a product has to declare that good. Since 2005, I believe the VIN number had to have been a part of that declaration, but it just came online in 2020. So that has to be submitted for every shipment 48 hours prior to the exportation before it can go on a vessel. What we probably need here is an investment in AI. There are vast sums of data which come into that service portal, and it's just not possible for 5 people or 100 people to go through that data. I know that FinTrack recently announced a large investment into AI to go through their massive amounts of data. If CBSA takes part of this $28 million and we apply that to intelligence targeting on those export declarations, they have an idea of what containers they should be looking at. There are, of course, too many containers to open every single one of them, but their intelligence to know who is shipping this product, is that actually what's inside of that container, and is gathering all that intelligence to know where should we target our efforts.
So, Mr. Lyons, would it be helpful if, much like the United States, where they have the 72-hour window, you have to have your manifest in, it can't be altered, would a change of legislation by the government be of value in curbing at least a little bit some of the auto thefts from an export market to tighten up the actual documentation of that process?
So we actually already have a system in place now since 2005.
Right.
Right now we have a 48-hour rule for
Right.
anything that leaves by a vessel. If going to 72 hours, that can certainly help, and I think that no legitimate trader would argue against that. Part of that process in the U.S., it's not that they actually look at the vehicle or in the container, they look at it at a title. So you submit a title to U.S. Customs 72 hours before that container can go onto the boat. Yep.
You're being very generous there. All right, Mr. Scheifke, please, for 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thanks to our witnesses for being here today. This is an issue of grave concern for my constituents. My neighbor just 4 days ago had his car stolen out of our driveway, my neighbor's driveway, and that's, I think, represents the vast majority of all the cars that are stolen. They're stolen straight out of people's driveways, right? And when I'm having discussions with my constituents, they're saying, is it me, or does it seem like cars are easier to steal now than they were before? And I didn't have an answer, so I started to look into it. I started to look at what's going on, not just in Canada, but around the world. We see 59% increase, and this is, I don't know if it's news to the Conservatives who think this is an made-in-Canada problem, but 59% increase in the UK year over year in auto thefts. The United States, 105% increase in car thefts. So there's an underlying problem here, regardless where you are in the world. In developing countries, there's more cars being stolen, right? My question, and this is start off to you, Mr. Adams. Ford posted $5.1 billion in profits last year. GM posted $19.1 billion in profits last year. Toyota, of which I own one, a Toyota RAV4, $61 billion, which represented an increase, significant increase year over year in profits. How much of that money is going in to ensuring that these cars are harder to steal than they were before?
Give you a dollar figure, but what I will say is that automakers are constantly hardening their systems against vehicle theft. And frankly, I think I resent and our members resent the implication that others have made that, oh, well, there was an immobilizer standard put in place in 2007 in Canada and nothing's been done since then. That's absolutely false.
I'm not even stating that. I just want to know how much, and if you don't have that information,
I can't
can you get that to the committee, please? Can you furnish that information?
I can't get Ford, GM, and Chryslers, but I can maybe see what I can do about the other members.
Any efforts in that regard
Sure.
would be helpful to us in determining exactly where we need to be putting our efforts. The question for you, Mr. Williams, representing all of the car dealerships in Canada, how many letters have you written to the car dealerships, to the car manufacturers, asking them to do more to make it harder for people to steal vehicles in Canada?
I would say this. We work on a daily basis on security of vehicles. One of the real challenges
But the question was, how many letters have you written asking them to make it harder?
We meet with them on a weekly basis, and this is an agenda item, so we do it in person. So we don't write them letters.
Do you have any data on how many letters have been written by your dealerships, for example, asking the automakers to make it even more difficult? Because, I mean, it's the second largest purchase that people have right after their homes, and you can't take somebody's home off their lot. You can definitely steal somebody's vehicle. So the second largest expense that people have, how much pressure are you putting on the automakers to make it harder to steal vehicles? In layman's terms and in concrete terms for the Canadians that are watching.
Yeah, for dealers, we want to make those cars as hard to steal as possible, but the natural conundrum is the manufacturers can give us a car that you can't steal, but the problem is you can't drive it or repair it. We've got 26 million vehicles on the road, and access to those vehicles...
I don't know. Sorry, can you clarify that? I don't understand what you mean by that. You can't drive it or repair it. What does that mean?
Yeah, I mean, you could lock it down in concrete. We had a case where a vehicle was stolen 5 days ago outside of a very well-known Montreal restaurant. Had a club on it, had a boot on the wheel, and they just put a tow truck and
okay, we're obviously not going to encase them in concrete, but 20 years ago, right, I remember I had a vehicle that had a key. It seemed easier... And it seemed harder for people to steal that car than it is now with all this supposed technology that we've put in place. It's actually easier. So what is happening? What pressure are you putting on the automakers, the ones that give you those vehicles, to make it harder? Because at the end of the day, this is costing taxpayers tens of billions of dollars. There's a lot of discussion about, well, the government needs to make, this is happening around the world.
Yeah, I think that's where...
The underlying factor in my view here, sir, is that the auto manufacturers making, just these three companies, $80 billion total in profit, are not addressing this and putting in place the investments necessary to protect the second largest investment that Canadians make. And we want answers. So I'd like to know if you can furnish any data to us and share with us the letters and the pressure in written form that you have put on the automakers to show that you are putting pressure on them to protect the second largest investment Canadians have. And I would like for you, Mr. Adams, to show us in concrete terms, in data, how much are you investing year over year for the last 10 years to make it harder for people to steal vehicles in Canada. And I cede remaining time to Mr. McKinnon. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, can we answer that question? Yeah, thank you for posing the question. I would just refer you to my colleague Damon's statistics that the stolen vehicle rate was actually higher, when there was a key entry. So it's declined since then. And what we've seen is the recovery rates have changed as well. It used to be that cars were easier to recover because it was local thieves stealing them, chop shops, that sort of thing. What's changed is the dynamic that they're being exported out of the country by international crime groups that are constantly trying to figure out how to crack the code of getting into these cars.
How much time do I have left, Mr. Chair? 45 seconds. So thank you, Mr. McKinnon. The thing is, Canadians don't care what happens to their car after it's stolen, whether it's going abroad or whether it's going to a chop shop. They don't want their car stolen to begin with. And for me, the onus is on the people making that car and ensuring that it is as difficult as humanly possible It is you versus the organized crime.
100%.
If they have the resources to break into those vehicles easier than they could before, then it is your job as the manufacturers to counter that with the $80 billion that you made in profit to ensure that it is harder. And I find it actually insulting that you're standing here, and I read this brief that was put forward that speaks about, $650,000 off the Oak Ford Assembly. That's 7 F-150s. That's 1% of the problem. The real problem is 99% are stolen out of people's driveways when they wake up in the morning to go to work, and they want cars that are harder to steal, not easier to steal, and we need you to do better.
Thank you, Mr. Shefke. We're going to move to Ms. Michaud, please, for 6 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Merci aux témoins pour votre présence. Votre expertise va être grandement appréciée. Écoutez, ça fait... on est au tout début de cette étude et il y a quand même plusieurs intervenants qui nous ont dit que les constructeurs d'automobiles avaient un plus grand rôle à jouer dans toute cette crise. Évidemment que la police a un rôle à jouer, l'Agence des services frontaliers...
Just one moment, there's no translation.
OK.
Go ahead. Okay, let's continue.
Ça va?
Please,
Est-ce que je recommence?
I will start again. Is my time going to be counted right from the beginning? Perfect. Thank you for joining us today. We are very grateful for your expertise and your assistance in this study. We're at the very beginning of this study, but some witnesses have already told us that automakers have a big role to play in addressing this crisis. And of course, police forces will have an important role, as well as border services. Now, at the Port of Montreal, I've spoken to some administrators of the Montreal port, and there's a lot of Quebec bashing going on. That's what they told me, that people are really bashing the Montreal port. But that's not what this is all about. Port administrators, port authorities do have a role to play, but I'd like to hear your thoughts about the role that automakers should play. My question is similar to Mr. Shifke's question about the role of technologies. What Equité Association told us is that the majority of cars which are stolen are new cars. That's been the case for cars manufactured in and after 2017. So it does seem to be easier to steal newer vehicles, perhaps because of new technologies. I'm able to start my car from my cell phone with new technologies. It's also possible to lock a car. For example, if I park at the parliamentary parking, then I sit down in the committee room here, I get a notification telling me where I parked my car. And all this new technology seems to be negative. It seems to be helpful to criminals. In fact, they can benefit from it. But you, when you manufacture the cars, could you perhaps do better? Could you perhaps do more? When I receive a notification on my phone saying that my car is parked in X spot, could I not also receive a notification saying that my vehicle has been started or unlocked by someone else? That is, started or unlocked by someone other than me, with technology other than my phone. Have automakers looked into that? Have automakers considered these factors? What more can you do to counter this increasing problem? Thank you for your question.
Automakers are continually hardening their vehicles. And to give you one example of what some automakers are doing with respect to auto theft, the key fob is predominantly has been identified as problematic with respect to vehicle theft in terms of the signal being intercepted between the home and the vehicle. A number of automakers now have worked, to Mr. Shifley's point, of improving their system such that when that key is stationary, that signal is cut off. Or automakers are integrating situations into the key fob where the key fob can be cut off so that signal no longer transmits. And to your point about technology, a number of other automakers are introducing technology into those applications which provide a geofence around the vehicle. So if your vehicle is in your driveway and it moves beyond a radius around where your home is, that you're notified right away that something's happened to that vehicle so that you know that it's not you that's doing that, it's something else. technology is constantly evolving in vehicles. It's constantly being improved and hardened against vehicle theft. No automaker wants to have their vehicle on the top 10 list of stolen vehicles because it's a black mark against their reputation, and we're working diligently to address the technology in vehicles on a daily basis.
I would say this with respect to the top 10 list. If you look at the Toyotas that are on that top 10 list as an example, not to pick on one particular brand, but those vehicles in Canada compared to the U.S., the stolen vehicle rate is 10 times higher on those Toyotas on the top 10 list in Canada, 6 times higher in Canada than it is in the U.S. It is a global problem. We take the point that this is organized crime everywhere, but we're uniquely being taken advantage of here in Canada.
Je vous remercie. J'étais au
Thank you. I participated in the National Summit on Combating Auto Theft a few weeks ago, and I'd like to mention to you some things I heard that were flabbergasting. One speaker said, "We recommend to people that they leave their cars in their garages, and that way their cars might not be stolen." I found that absolutely shocking. Not everyone has a garage, for starters. And there have been break-ins. There have been break-ins to garages, too, so that wasn't really the brightest idea. Here's something else I heard. Another speaker, I don't remember who, said, well, it's not automakers' fault or cars' fault. The fault lies with criminals. Well, that's not the whole story because automakers can take action. The goal of the National Summit was to get all stakeholders around the same table. And what we found out is that there's truly a lack of teamwork among stakeholders. The government came up with this initiative, and the government spoke at the summit. Ministers gave speeches. Solutions were put forward. But I thought that we were going to consult stakeholders before proposing solutions. But anyhow, the ministers went ahead and made suggestions. For example, Minister Champagne said that we should ban devices that make it possible to copy keys. And yesterday in La Presse, police officers and cybersecurity experts said that that wouldn't really help because devices have been banned, but offenders are still using these devices. So that suggestion by the minister clearly wasn't the fruit of consultation because it's not that helpful.
In response to that is that and you're right, it's important to have coordination and networking and dialogue amongst all stakeholders, and that's what we've been facilitating on our own through the association for the last number of months with police task forces right across the country. And what the police task forces, auto theft task forces, has said to us is that whenever they have a bust of a vehicle ring, not only do they find the vehicles, but they find counterfeit key fobs, and they also find devices that are used to copy keys and to interrogate the vehicle so that they can start the vehicle. So will banning those devices help? It can't hurt, and what could help is at least not having them readily available on online platforms like Amazon and Alibaba for a few $100s or a few $1,000s.
Mr. Adams, and thank you, Ms. Michaud. We're moving on now to Mr. Julian, please. 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks to our witnesses. I want to follow up very quickly on you, Mr. Adams. You mentioned a number of initiatives to harden vehicles against auto theft. Do you have any idea of what the cost per vehicle of those particular elements? You talked about modifying the key fob so it doesn't transmit, those kinds of things. Do you have any sense of how much that adds to the cost of a vehicle?
I don't, but I think that reflects back on Mr. Shifley's comment, and I can try and determine that amount for you. I guess it goes to the overall issue of affordability for Canadians, and there is some cost associated with it for sure.
And absolutely, there have been concerns that have been raised about the part that auto manufacturers play in preventing auto theft. I think it is a multifaceted problem, as you've all expressed, not just manufacturers hardening their vehicles at what can be a relatively low cost, and I think your figures will help us with that, but it's also government responsibility as well. And so I wanted to come back to you, Mr. Williams. You mentioned in your brief our dealership employees are being carjacked at gunpoint, pistol whipped, run over, and shot at. Do you have figures to share with us about the extent to which that has happened across the country? And my second question, you've also spoken, I think, quite appropriately about the role of CBSA. We heard testimony earlier this week from Mr. Weber of the CIU, who very clearly pointed to the Conservative government's cuts of 1,100 officers back in 2014 that the CBSA has not recovered from, and the new government did not in any way respond to the size and scope of those cuts, which means, according to Mr. Weber, there are 3,000 agents short. So to what extent do you have figures on some of these violent acts of car dealership employees, and to what extent these cuts initiated by the Conservatives, maintained by the Liberals, serve to undermine the ability of CBSA to really enforce the law?
Yeah, I wouldn't be able to give you a figure on the exact number of stolen vehicles at dealerships off the top of my head, but I could look into that for sure. I mean, the cases that I'm referencing there are well known and documented in the media. Sales folks run over as they get strong-armed robbery. There's a very famous case in British Columbia where a police officer was shot responding to a Chrysler dealership that was robbed at gunpoint of vehicles. So, and you know, dealerships across the country can all tell you stories of you know, people coming in for test drives and then snatching the keys and going and bolting that way. So you know, it's a pervasive problem.
I understand. It's helpful for us to have the concrete numbers.
Yeah, for sure.
If that is something that your association gathers, it would be helpful to know.
We don't gather, but I tell you what, I undertake to look into it and see what we can do to provide some clarity on that front. With respect to the coordination issue, we've been somewhat mystified because we've been really promoting this issue on a cross-jurisdictional basis since, you know, roughly 2022, and we really saw between 2018 and 2022 in all the GTA areas 200% increases in auto theft. And when we took part in elements like the Peel Auto Summit, CBSA was reticent to come to the table. I mean, police chiefs from all over the region were there. Leadership and law enforcement from OPP was there. CBSA was absent if seen leadership capacity. And it's mystifying to us.
Yeah, but you've said, and I certainly agree, and other witnesses have as well, organized crime has taken advantage of CBSA not being able to act on this issue. And the cuts that were done by the Conservatives in 2014 that have not been restored by the Liberals to date, leaving us 3,000 agents short. Do you believe that that's been a contributing element to the fact that we haven't been able to crack down on organized crime syndicates and do the appropriate filtering to ensure that vehicles are not being shipped overseas?
Yeah, I would comment that CBSA seems in some disarray with respect to dealing with the exports, and I think that's a combination of personnel training, but also the overall approach in terms of, and you know, I think the union did a very good job of explaining that on previous testimony this week.
Thank you. Now, you referenced BC, and to all of you, BC has been the exception across the country. We've seen a rise, particularly in Ontario, of car thefts. In BC, the number actually went down in 2022. There are anecdotal violent acts. I don't doubt that. But one of the reasons that some people have been attributing to the BC being the exception, because BC is on a trade route to the Middle East. In fact, it's easier to ship to the Middle East from British Columbia than it is from Eastern Canada in many respects. It seems to be the fact that there is integrated law enforcement, but also what has been called the biggest bait car program in the world. And the bait car program, I know the City of New Westminster Police that do an excellent job, Burnaby RCMP, and RCMP detachments throughout the Lower Mainland work with local police detachments. The bait car program has been a real success when we see rising rates elsewhere, and yet in BC, rates remaining stable or even going down, as I mentioned in 2022. To what extent should we be integrating some of the BC strategies to help lower auto theft rates in other parts of the country?
I'll jump on this
Yeah,
one.
please.
Okay. I think we saw in Ontario when we had the extremely high rate, the creation of the Ontario Provincial Auto Theft Team in the early 2000s. And as we saw by 2012, they had such a success that by 2015, the team was disbanded. That's the time period, again, that we start to see that start to slowly creep back up again. And BC has the impact team, of course, which has been there for the entirety of that time. So certainly having the resources brought back in is critical. Ontario invested $51 million toward auto theft for the OPP. And there was a stat that came out from Toronto Police just recently that in January of this year, they saw their first decline in auto theft compared to January of last year. So potentially it's 1 month, but it could already be a success that we see that the investment in helping the police on the ground, this could be one of the avenues to help knock this down.
Thank you, Mr. Julian. Thank you, Mr. Lyons. We're moving into the second round now, and we have Mr. Couric up for 5 minutes, please.
Thanks very much to our witnesses, and I find it really interesting how this meeting has gone, because the Liberals specifically seem desperate to blame anybody for their inaction, and specifically when it comes to the revolving door of the justice system. And Mr. Williams, a lot of your members, there are certainly the larger car dealership networks, the larger ones that own a number of dealerships, but many of your members, and I know in my constituency, as an example, these are small businesses. These are smaller communities that have, they're 20, 30 employees. Can you share what you're hearing from your members about some of the ways that they're practically trying to fill in the gaps that are being created by the revolving door of the justice system to combat the explosion in the rate of stolen vehicles in this country?
Yeah, I appreciate the commentary. When you're a single dealership operator and that is your family business, we're truly the victims of this. I mean, I'm not diminishing, to the member from Vaudreuil's commentary that our customers are the largest victims of this, but we are in a constant cat and mouse game with organized crime to try to protect those assets, because if you've got 100 vehicles on the lot, you've got to put hard security measures in place, and I won't list those all here because I don't want to tip our hand to organized crime. But it's a constant ratcheting up of those elements, and every dealership has a constantly evolving protocol. What's new in the last 5 years, I think, is that dealerships have had to reach out to former law enforcement, security officials to have them, on paid retainers to help them to harden their assets, protect their employees going forward. And we've seen everything from, the thefts at night as well, where they come in and remove physical barriers and flatbed vehicles out of there, to knocking right into the showroom walls.
Can I ask, but it may seem like a fairly straightforward question, but is there costs associated with those measures?
The costs are enormous, of course, with respect to that. But it's also the cost and increasing pressure from insurers, because if you're constantly a victim, just as the average member of the public is constantly a victim of this, there's pressure on the insurance cost as well.
So these small business owners, in many cases, certainly the car dealerships that I represent, they're paying the costs. Those are being passed on to consumers. Everybody, whether it's dealerships, whether it's individuals, are paying higher costs. So would it to you make sense, especially for these repeat offenders? And I know I recently heard a statistic where in Alberta, a very small, several hundred individuals were responsible for thousands of crimes, resulting in tens of thousands of hours of police time being taken to put resources into, in some cases, having to rearrest the same person time and time again for things like auto theft and some of the associated criminal activity. Would it make sense to you that if somebody seems intent on continually breaking the law, if that person was to face appropriate penalty for their crime, would that assist in helping make sure that vehicles are no longer stolen?
Yeah, I do think we need a layered approach that addresses this, and I think specific penalties for auto theft and enforcement of that, I think is important. And what we should all be outraged with is that it's international organized crime taking advantage of Canadian youth in some cases and paying them exorbitant sums of money to get involved in crime. That's the tragedy underlining this is that it's large international groups taking advantage of Canadians, paying them, incentivizing them to become part of these organized crime rings.
Yeah. Please.
Hop on that.
Sure.
Toronto police announced a bust last year where they arrested hundreds of people. And when questioned about it, were you arresting the people on the street or the higher levels of the crime group? I think it was the chief said, we are not getting the head of the snake. And this is really the key. We can take our criminal justice system. Are we going to put kids in jail for 3 years? Or are we going to try and get the head of organized crime? There was a report from a couple of years ago that 86% of money laundering cases never go to trial in Canada.
Wow.
That's a horrible number. We have a Proceeds of Crime Money Laundering Terrorist Financing Act, but it's hardly ever used. And the reason being...
I am out of time, but maybe I just conclude by saying that instead of sending letters, maybe we need real action.
Thank you, Mr. Carrick. Mr. Biddle, please, for 5 minutes.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. And I guess I'll start with Mr. Williams. And I guess I say I'm a little disappointed because the witnesses we've heard from have talked about a multi-layered approach, that there are properly issues with CBSA, issues with law enforcement, issues with the industry, with insurance, and that everyone has a part to play. But your organization just came here and said, well, we need an AutoZAR, whatever that is, whatever that does, that doesn't really acknowledge jurisdictional issues and whatnot. Why doesn't the auto industry have a part to play in the minds of dealers?
Let me be perfectly clear. Car dealers don't want our vehicles to be stolen. We don't want our customers to be victims of it. And I think that the answer deserves a fair commentary. When customers are coming into dealerships and saying, I'm turning in these keys because I'm worried about this brand being on the top 10, and I don't want my wife to be carjacked or my family to be carjacked while they're driving it.
I appreciate that. So why aren't you demanding your manufacturers make it more difficult to steal the car, or I think request that the government step in with more regulation with respect to the auto industry and items that can be put in place if the industry doesn't want to do anything?
I want to be clear. We do put pressure on the manufacturers to try to make the cars, and we work cooperatively with them to try to up that game against organized crime. We just don't do it, respectfully by writing letters to them. So
I didn't ask you to write letters. You came here to testify as an expert, and you didn't mention anything in terms of that, except for your only solution to this is an AutoZAR. I'll move on. You stated that the rates of auto theft are lower in the United States, and you did say specifically, to be fair to you, with respect to one brand of vehicle. Were you just testifying with respect to one brand of vehicle? Because we heard from Equite at the last meeting that the rates of auto theft between the United States and Canada are very similar. Do you have different evidence or data to provide this committee that the rates of auto theft are actually higher in Canada?
Yeah, I would say, and I'd be happy to provide the data to the committee, that historically the rates of auto theft, correcting for population, have been higher in Canada than the United States. It's one of the few areas over 30 years.
So you provide me that data, and Equite that testified last week is wrong?
No, I would not say that they're wrong. I haven't, what I would say is that we have definitely seen in the last 2 years spikes in the auto theft in the U.S. as well.
Okay.
If I could interject and answer your question.
Very quickly, Mr. Adams, I'm running out of time.
You asked for a comparison. So the National Crime Insurance Bureau in the United States stipulated that from 2021 to 2022, their auto insurance theft rates increased by 10.4%. Stats Canada's increase from 2021 to 2022 is 24%. So similar vehicles, both countries, twice the rate of increase in auto theft in Canada is in the United States, according to StatsCan and National Crime Insurance Bureau.
Okay. You did agree with the Conservative point in terms of their quote-unquote tough-on-crime approach. I guess in terms of that, having that similar rate, and I guess we can debate in terms of, and I'll concede the point that the increase may be higher, but the rates are still probably the same or very similar. Why do you think that higher rates, higher levels of incarceration, higher sentences, which exist in the United States, higher prevalence of mandatory minimums, why is that not working in the United States, but that it'll work in Canada?
You want me to answer that question, sir?
You're the one that spoke to it, yes.
Yeah, happy to do so. Listen, I was appointed by a Liberal member, the Liberal minister, to sit on the National Business Crime Prevention Council under Minister Rock. Dealt with social determinants of how to help Canadians commit fewer crimes. We're not here, purporting that we jump on the U.S. style system. I want to be clear about this. But what we are hearing from law enforcement is the frustration about the rearrest format, and I think we should all be outraged that organized crime is taking advantage of young people, paying them a lot of money to steal cars and do home invasions. And there's something different about the way Canada is, particularly in Quebec and Ontario, and again, this is what law enforcement tell us, and with the funnel coming through the Port of Montreal. And I think when you look at what happens in the West Coast, yes, you've got the continuation of the crime task force, but you also have that funnel of cars constantly going through the Port of Montreal. I will note that the law enforcement chiefs, police chief in Ontario, told me personally that they're concerned about, as Hamilton comes on as a port, does that become the next point of entry for organized crime to take advantage of?
Thank you. I'm out of time.
Mr. Biddle, we'll move to Ms. Michaud, please.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. Earlier, it was said that this problem is not a made-in-Canada problem. Cars are being stolen elsewhere in the world, especially in the United States and in Europe. The president of Équité Association told us earlier this week that theft prevention technology has been implemented by automakers in the United Kingdom. That occurred, in fact, after insurers stopped being willing to insure frequently stolen cars. That's when automakers decided to implement and develop new technologies. So, Mr. Adams, could you talk to us about these technologies? I don't know whether you're familiar with these technologies, which have been implemented in the United Kingdom, but you represent auto manufacturers, so I reckon you are familiar with them. Now, in Canada, will we have to wait until insurers decide to stop insuring some cars before automakers take these steps, or can automakers be proactive and take these necessary steps right now?
I would say that automakers are already taking proactive steps now to harden and safeguard their vehicles. In terms of the activity that's been undertaken in the UK, I'm vaguely familiar with that, but what I understand is that every solution has unintended consequences, and some of the unintended consequences that I'm aware of the solution proposed in the UK is that some auto manufacturers have said, well, it's not worth the cost of me investing in that technology, at least for certain models. So as a result, the model availability of vehicles has dropped. That's not to say that technology might not be something that we should look at, but I guess with respect to the overall issue of technology, I would just say that, as an association, we advocated for the holding of these hearings. We're interested in getting to the bottom of auto theft. We know that we're part of the solution, but we're not necessarily looking to be a scapegoat in terms of it's all the automakers' problem. I think the federal government itself has outlined as the outcome of the auto theft that the justice system needs to be looked at. CBSA needs resources and more, to Mr. Lyon's point, resources to implement technology. We don't have an international shipping. We haven't upheld our international shipping obligations in terms of implementing treaties that would implement technology to safeguard exports going out of the country. So it is an all of society problem. And if we want to look at technology and implement technology, sure, we can look at that. But my response to you would be is that we have an auto theft problem right now in Canada. And if we have a solution that's going to be a technology standard, that's going to take some time to implement software, hardware, getting suppliers on board to facilitate that. So we're happy to look at that. But it's not going to do anything to solve the problem right now.
Mr. Julian, you'll be the last one up for this panel, please.
Thank you. Just a very quick question to you, Mr. Adams. You said that there are fewer models available in the UK market. If you have any information about what that has actually meant, whether we're talking about a reduction of 3 models or 30 models, I think it would be helpful to us.
Sure.
And I want to come back to you, Mr. Lyons. You just before the chair justly cut me off my questioning, I was going to follow up. You said in 2018 it was an integrated crime unit in Ontario that was ended.
I believe it was around 2015, the Ontario Provincial Auto Theft Team that existed since the early 2000s. And again, at the Ontario level, they were coordinated across the various police departments just to tackle auto theft, and we saw it in that time period.
And it was ended in 2018?
2015, I believe in the 2015 area. It was
Okay.
hard to actually get the start date and end date, but it was in that time period from my recollection anyways.
Okay, thank you. And if you have more information to offer on that, it would be helpful.
I think it's part of our submission as well.
Yeah, thank you. Money laundering, and you referenced 86% of money laundering cases not being followed up within the justice system.
There was an article that we cited it in our larger piece to you,
Yeah.
and that's a major problem. Organized crime really is the issue. Again, we can look at incarcerating every teenager or 20-year-old for 3 years. Are we putting them there to put them in prison? Are we putting them there to rehabilitate them? But how do we get to the organized crime? Again, we have the Proceeds Act. But in talking to XRCMP officers, they say it's expensive, it's time-consuming, it's complicated, and so they usually just drop those cases and go after some kind of a civil forfeiture. That's great because you take away some money from organized crime now, but in the long run, they're going to make that money back. And so we have to really, again, have the all approach. We have to get the offenders off the street now. Do we, again, try and help rehabilitate them so they have a better life going forward, or do we adjust the head of the snake?
So this issue of financial crime has come up repeatedly. We saw under the former Conservative government how weak they were on financial crime. And tragically, the Liberal government hasn't really taken the initiatives that are important in this respect, including putting in place that publicly accessible beneficial ownership registry that helps to crack down on money laundering. Would you say that that's a key component, if we're talking about a multifaceted approach on auto theft, that cracking down on financial crime and money laundering is the important component?
100%, yes.
Yeah.
Chair, just a point of clarification.
Yes.
Just Mr. Adams, in response to Mr. Biddle's question, talked about, I think it was insurance rates and Stats Can. Was that right? Or was it theft rates? And either way, will you commit theft rates? Will you commit that table to us? Sure. Thanks.
Thank you, and this is the end of the first panel, so thank you for coming in here today. A great discussion on a very important issue. So we're going to suspend for approximately 5 minutes.